Okay, or a quorum. So good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our February meeting of the Joint Facilities Advisory Commission. On the screen in front of you, Robert, I think, has very kindly pulled up our agenda, and he'll have it up there so that we can refer to it as we go along. So at the beginning of the meeting, there's a thing I'm supposed to say, so I'm going to go ahead and launch into it. For the safety of our commission members, staff, and participating community members, we are holding a virtual meeting tonight. All participants with us are joining remotely. We are legally authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the governor's executive orders, legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly, the school board's continuity of operations resolutions, and the county board's continuity of operations ordinance. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Tonight's meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the JFAC website. The meeting is available to stream from the JFAC website via a Microsoft Teams link. There's also a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If commission members, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. That's always an option. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For everyone joining us via Teams, please turn off your video feed, and I will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. When you're called on to speak, please unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. If you are dialing in by phone, press *6 to unmute. And so for our commissioners, if commissioners wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please use one of the three methods to be recognized. You could use the raise hand feature within Teams. It's also in your command bar. Ask to be recognized using the chat box, or turn your video feed on and leave your microphones muted until you've been recognized. Once you've completed speaking, please turn your video feed back off. And do we actually have any commission? I think we did have somebody dialing in by phone. Is that a commission member? Is anybody on the phone tonight? Any commission members?
Doesn't look like anybody's on the phone at the moment.
Okay. There was a number I saw at one point. So if that ever happens and you don't have video, I will make sure to verbally check in to see if you wish to be recognized. And then public comment is scheduled to take place tonight at approximately 8:40. At that time, I'll ask members of the public who wish to be recognized to unmute and state your name. And we always ask speakers to try to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Lastly, this is a public forum. All information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. And so with that, I think we can start our meeting. All right, so again, I just wanted to say hello. We all were able to turn on our videos for video feeds for a moment and greet each other, so that's terrific. I did note we do have 2 members of the public who are here. Cynthia Hilton, who has joined us quite a bit over the last couple of years, so nice to see you, Cynthia. And I see somebody named Ruth is here as well. I didn't know if, Ruth, you wanted to take yourself off and just say hello.
Hi, this is Ruth. I just want to listen.
Okay, terrific. Welcome. All right. So what we're going to do tonight, actually, is talk about the 2 questions that we have from APS to answer. As you recall, we had 2 questions from APS and 1 from the county specifically. And the one from the county, we really won't tackle until the missing, because it's related to the missing middle, until the missing middle process is more fully underway. And, you know, they probably the fall or winter is when we'll tackle that question, because we'll just, you know, frankly, we'll just know a lot more about what's going to be studied. And at this point, there's the county is still determining with the public, with a series of public meetings, what they're going to study. So it does seem timely, though, that the 2 questions from APS we could tackle now. And in fact, I think in the past couple of years, we've had some conversations that touch on at least one of these questions. So just to remind you, Robert has the questions up on the screen. The first one is, how do other jurisdictions integrate school facilities needs in land use studies, such as sector plans, which often increase permitted residential densities? And then the second question is, how do other Virginia jurisdictions incorporate schools in public-private partnership agreements? We also took a very brief look at these questions during our last meeting in January. And as we closed that meeting, I had asked everybody to do a little bit of research, if you could, find one example of how other jurisdictions integrate school facilities in land use or other plans when they increase density, and also how other Virginia jurisdictions incorporate schools in public-private partnerships. So I know several of you have done that homework, and what I'd like to do first is talk about how we go about answering these questions. I have a proposal I'd like to put on the table, and I'd like to hear, everybody's feedback. And then the second part of the conversation will be actually talking about what you uncovered, if you'd like to talk to the group about that. So in terms of so I'm basically flipping the first two bullets. So in terms of addressing this, Stacy and I had a talk briefly before this, and we also had discussed it with Robert and Matt. And sort of taking our cue from what the community facility study had done when they were looking at very specific questions in 2014, 2015, they had formed separate committees. People who wanted to research a particular question, or had an affinity or an interest in a specific question, joined the committee that was answering the question they liked. And then we had either the chair or the vice chair chair those committees. So my first proposal is that we form subcommittees to tackle each question. Now, if it turns out everybody would like to tackle each question, I think we can do that. But I'd be interested to hear any comments on that. I have one more proposal that I'd like us to talk about in terms of how we form these committees. Actually, two more proposals. Every committee meeting must also be public. So we have to be able to have it be advertised, be available to people, members of the public, to actually join and listen in. And so one way we could do this is take the next couple of meetings and take, say, the first 55 minutes of the meeting and talk about one question, and the second 55 minutes of the meeting and talk about the other question. That's a way we could do it, and that way we would not be putting additional burden on staff, because there's not another meeting that we have to, another one or two meetings that we have to do in a month, and it's already public and it's already advertised, because we will have advertised our regular meeting. Or if we don't think that gives us enough time, or for people feel differently, I certainly could entertain some other options. The key, though, is that it has to be a public meeting and facilitated as such. And then the other thing I'd like you to consider is having other members of the public be part of our subcommittees, so that rather than wait until the very end to give public comment on the question we're talking about, they can actually participate. It is also something we did during the community facility study. There were several members of the community who were interested in these questions or had some expertise in the questions. And so we had them join our subcommittee, and that's certainly within our rights as a commission. We could certainly appoint people to subcommittees. And so those are my proposals, and I'm interested in hearing what you all think. So if you want to raise your hand or put yourself on camera, I'd be happy to recognize you. Janet?
Being a newbie to the commission, but I would agree with you, Kathleen. I mean, I think not adding extra meetings and extra burden on staff because of everything else that's going on makes perfect sense to me. And then I think we could probably see, like you mentioned, well, maybe if it's not enough time, you're going to know probably after, I don't know, 1 or 2 meetings if you're not getting enough done. So I would say ditto and kudos to what you've proposed.
Great. Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, so I absolutely support adding members of the public if there's any that are interested to the subcommittees. My one concern, and just for context, I did miss our January meeting, so I'm a little bit behind perhaps in the logistics of where we're going right now over the next year. But it sounds like that would be taking up the entirety of all of our upcoming meetings. And just the concern would be whether that leaves us enough flexibility to deal with any other topics that we want to address as they come up.
So on question number 2, toward the end of the meeting, why don't I go through and talk about, what we have planned for future meetings. But certainly for the March and April meeting, we won't hear the CIP probably until May, or be asked for our input on the CIP until May. So we do have March and April where we really could look at these questions. Doesn't mean we have to finish them by then, but I think we could probably make a good start. Steve?
Yeah, Kathleen, I think very supportive of your proposal, including inviting members of the public for sure. I've been a broken record on this point over the years now that we have clarity that as a commission, we're creating committees and not subcommittees, unless we have a committee that in turn has subcommittees. So I heard both committee and subcommittees as you spoke, but
I'm sure I said both of them.
just because I'm a pain in the rear, I would prefer that we use the committee terminology. And I actually like the idea of the opening chunk of time being devoted to committee discussion rather than trying to schedule separate committee meetings. So that's my feedback.
And your point on committee versus subcommittee is well taken. I'll try to remember to use committee. Susan.
I would also support the kind of approach to how we organize. I like that. Though I did want to kind of push back on what the 2 questions are and whether we might expand a little bit. I think there is grave concern in Arlington and many other counties about how schools and county are cooperating in the reopening of schools and the sustaining of opening of schools. And so I wonder if we might add a COVID special layer to it of, what are the best practices that we're seeing across Virginia and maybe in other jurisdictions for how best to leverage county resources to meet that unusual need during this time.
I think it's a really good point that, as the county and schools are coming out of COVID, we might have different needs, right? And it might take us, I don't know, a year or 2 years to come out of it and figure out what the new normal is. And so I think it makes a lot of sense, Susan, that we would address, COVID and then sort of post-COVID. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think even in the very near term, in the how are schools operating in May? How are rec programs operating over the summer? How does the fall restart? I think there is room for some innovation, and everyone's kind of going at full throttle, trying to just do what's in front of them. And I hear a deep hunger from the community for additional innovation on that front. So I think we might be able to bring that lens of what is working, what's not working, and save us a few reps.
So thinking about the questions, so that's interesting, and I think we'll probably talk about this more as we actually dissect the question and get really into the meat of this. I do want us to be careful, though, and not too much scope creep, right? Because then we might go on, we could probably study this for a year and a half. So we probably want to stick as close as possible to the questions of density and use. But I certainly welcome, other thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think definitely it's, facility use is the main element there. And at least in other jurisdictions, there's a big push for recreation facilities and outdoor spaces and parks and schools to work together in slightly more aggressive ways than have been naturally occurring in the past.
Okay, I understand you now. Thank you. Yes. So Stacy.
I just wanted to add in. I appreciate everyone's thoughts and agree with the points about the meeting during regular meeting time. I think that's a really to me, I think we do have to be mindful of staff time and resources. But I just to me, these two questions really can be valuable to us to investigate, because they can't, even though we're not formally working on a public facilities master plan right now, I think that this investigation could really lead us in that direction. And I think that these are really valuable questions, and I would like for us to look at them with that in mind, that our end point is that this could be an investigation that could lead us to actually creating a better, more well thought out public facilities master plan once we can get to that point.
I think it's a great point, Stacy, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think everything we're going to do for the next year is going to help inform the eventual work that we do on the schools and public facilities master plan. Definitely. Any other comments? I did have one question, and I'm open to what you all think about it and ideas you have, and that is, how would we recruit some interested outside parties who might want to be part of this conversation, or who have interest or specific expertise? We could take out an ad. We could. I'm just wondering, how would you suggest we go about that? Because I would want to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that people who are interested here, that we're interested in having them on these committees. Steve?
Well, the immediate thought that comes to mind, Kathleen, would be to try to take advantage of the county's existing outreach structure, and maybe, I know it's making a request of staff, but ask them to put out something in one of their regular announcements to Arlington, mentioning the opportunity. And plus that's a little bit more official as well, but essentially a lightweight, something that would go out in one of the routine emails and or social media things. I mean, that's the main thought that jumps into my mind.
Right, and there are existing listservs, right, that people have signed up for. So I was also thinking about going up again, expanding beyond the usual suspects too. So to get
which is harder, yeah.
It is a wider diversity of opinion. Ted?
And Matt, you may know this, or Matt, is there a centralized list of the Civic Association presidents, or a communication that goes out to them on a regular basis where they could reach out during their regular meetings to their listservs to the membership in the civic associations, and just some kind of a public release kind of a thing?
That's a great question, Ted. We could probably do that, because all the civic association contacts are listed on a website, and so many of them now use Nextdoor.
Mm-hmm.
So we could do that. Nextdoor and civic association. That's a good idea. Thank you. Wells?
I think it's a great idea to reach out to the leaders of civic associations. As it happens, I went through this exercise of compiling the presidents of the various Arlington civic associations over the summer. So I had that as a resource if we choose to go that route.
Awesome. It sounds like you're volunteering to do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's good news. Anybody else? Looking for hands here or faces. Okay, well, I think that's a terrific start. You know, the usual, county channels, and I think we could probably, write up a little blurb. Maybe we could also get it put on the website, but, that probably has limited eyes on it. And also Nextdoor and the civic associations. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Wow, we're a very agreeable group tonight. It sounds like I haven't heard any different idea, which I would certainly welcome. Matt, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, just on that last topic, Kathleen, and we're happy to look at the county channels, and of course we have just as Wells does, we have access to the Civic Association presidents. I just note that these two research questions came from APS, so obviously we're all one county.
Yes.
But there may be some more, rather than focusing on county groups, county resources. There may be some more school focused groups you would want to reach out to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the CCPTA is certainly one place we should be looking. But I think in Arlington we all support schools. So, and I think we all have an interest in seeing schools be planned for well. So, thank you. All right, great. Robert, could I trouble you to put up the agenda again? Thank you.
Sure.
Unless there were other comments or questions, anybody we haven't heard from? Okay. All right, so terrific. So just to sum up, it sounds like we are going to go ahead and, oh, that's a little small, Robert. Thank you. It sounds like we're going to go ahead and have the meetings for each of these questions that we're going to tackle during our regularly scheduled, at least the next two regularly scheduled JFAC meetings. And we'll take the first, roughly 55 minutes for the first one. And the second part of the meeting could be for the second one. That would mean, of course, that technically we don't necessarily have to split up into committees if we don't want to. I mean, you can choose that, one question over the other. The other option, and I guess I should have asked this, I'm sorry, Robert and Matt. The other option is whether or not both meetings could be public and also happen simultaneously, so they could take the full 2 hours. Like we have, a 5-minute welcome, and then we split people into different rooms. I know I was on another county process that split people into rooms. So do we know how to do that, Matt?
Yeah, I think we have the breakout room function, but we could also just structure it as 2 separate meetings that are happening at the same time.
Of course.
And you have a Robert and a Matt. So
so we have, yes.
We can each staff each of those if that's how you want to proceed.
Yeah, that would be easier, because I don't know if at APS we have the breakout option with teams.
Yeah.
It might be easier just to set up 2 meetings, because then even if people wanted to switch back and forth for some reason, I think it would be easier to do that with 2 separate meetings, 2 separate links, rather than using the breakout rooms.
Right. Yeah. And now that now that you say that, it's probably easier to do the recordings as well when you have 2 separate meetings.
That's true. The advantage of the breakout rooms is if we wanted to meet as a full group, break out into 2 smaller groups and then come back. We have that functionality.
Okay. Yep. That sounds good. All right. So to all the other commissioners, I mean, maybe we'll find that we really want to take almost the full 2 hours on each question. And so having said that, I should mention, and I'm trying, Steve, to remember to say committee rather than subcommittee. The 2 committees that will form of those, for the first question, I believe, Stacy, you wanted to go ahead and take this one and share this one, right? The one about the other jurisdictions integrating school facilities into land use.
Yes, I can take that one. Although I'm flexible. I can do either one.
And then I think that was the one you preferred, though, right?
Okay.
And then I'll take the second one, the Virginia jurisdictions incorporating school and public-private partnership agreements. Okay, terrific. And so, any other comments or questions about sort of the logistics of how we're going to do this? Does anybody want to give me a preference for a 1 hour, 2 1 hour meetings or 1 2 hour meeting happening at the same time? Eric?
I guess the concern with simultaneous meetings would just be that we have a critical mass for each question. I think if we do them back to back, most people will stay for both. I guess we're only at 9 members here tonight. So if it's 8 and 1 or 7 and 2, I think that probably doesn't work well.
Good point. Okay, and of course, the number of people who are outside our commission also who are interested in joining could also help drive that, perhaps. If we get too many people, we probably will want to split it up and take a longer period of time. Steve? Steve, I saw your hand. And you might be muted.
Sorry, yeah. The universal forgetting to unmute. My apologies. If we do 2 concurrent meetings, I think we get right back into the issue you were expressing concerns about before about advertising and so forth. Whereas if we were able to do breakouts, I think that probably could be considered to be 1 meeting. Anyway, I think we just need to remember the concern you were, I think, rightly talking about before about advertising meetings. If we were to do it that way, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I do think they could both be advertised and then people could just join whichever meeting they wanted. So they're both public as long as they're advertised and, we allow people to enter.
Right.
Yeah. But I think you're right. We should just make sure that it's easy to understand what we're doing. Rodney, I see your hand.
Yes, and I'm in a car, so I'm not on camera, so I apologize. But do we want to, since we're inviting people from the public, in which we want to have them participate, do we need to cap the number of participants to sort of facilitate a meeting getting done, or and do we, with regard to how people divide their time on each committee, excuse me, not subcommittee. Sorry, Steve. Do we want to, force each of us to decide which committee to be a part of to make sure you have a relatively even breakout?
Right. I think those are great questions. I guess I was thinking we probably would not have 40 people beating down our door, but you're right. I mean, what if we do? We should have a plan for that. And so I would think that ideally no more than, say, 12 to 15 people would be good, knowing that there are only 10 of us. And I wasn't going to force people to, pick one of the, over the other necessarily. Well, we can talk about this because I was thinking we could also leave it open to where people could switch. One could go to one meeting 1 month, one committee meeting, and then go to the second one the next month. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's going to be an issue of just how you plan to have the meetings. Will you have them, concurrently, or will you have them in succession? And so, when thinking about how you're going to have the meetings operate, then figure out how people will participate in the meetings. If they're concurrent, you can go 1 month and go to one and go to the next month to another, but that lacks some continuity, possibly.
True.
So I'm just spitballing here. So I'm asking questions.
No, I appreciate it. It's a good point. Any other thoughts on it? Preferences? Maybe I should ask, does anybody have a preference for one over the other? How many of you have a preference for number 1, which is the integrating school facilities in land use studies and sector plans? You want to raise your hand? Actually, that might be the easiest. And Rodney, tell me if since you're on the phone.
No,
So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I can raise my hand too. I'm just trying to.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
I'll let them raise their hands. Sure.
So I'm seeing a total of 4. Well, okay, now I'm seeing 5 people for that one. Okay, including Stacy, who's chairing it. And then if you put your hands down then, and then how many of you are interested in the public-private partnership agreements? Oh, I should do my hand, shouldn't I? Not sure I can do both at the same time. Okay, there we go. Well, we seem to be pretty evenly broken out right now, actually. So I think the breakout, the split of actual commission members is not an issue. If I go with what I'm seeing here, it looked like 5 and 5 actually. Now I'm trying to remember how to get there, my hands down. So yeah, so I think it's going to depend on folks who want to. Folks from outside the commission who want to participate. And so I would say, if we're aiming for, at least 12 people per group, 12 to 15, we could take, since we have 5 in each, we could take 7 to 9 members of the public who'd be interested in. I personally think we'd be really lucky to get 7 to 9 people for each committee who would be interested. But, again, maybe I'd be surprised. And in that case, it would be like a first come, first serve sort of selection, right? I don't think we're going to have a formal selection process. I think it's the first 7 to 9 people who express an interest are, get put on the committee. Does that seem fair, or do you want to actually have a selection process? Any thoughts on that?
Hi, this is Stacy. I just, maybe we just see what interest is, and then if we have to limit it, then we make that decision at that time.
Okay. All right, I'm good with that. All right, I'm looking to see if anybody else has a comment. I'm seeing some thumbs up, so all right, sounds like people agree with you, Stacy. All right, good. Well, thank you all so much. Okay, so now moving on to the real meat here. I wanted to spend some time, and we have approximately the next 50 minutes. So I'll break it up 25 and 25 approximately. Let's talk about the questions themselves. I know that some of you have actually done a little research on this. And so the first research question, which is, again, how other jurisdictions integrate school facilities needs in land use studies, such as sector plans, which often increase permitted residential densities. I know that, let's see, I think Stacy had done some research. I think that Janet had actually done some research, maybe everybody, but but I'm going to go ahead and start with, say, Janet, and then I'll call on everybody who's interested or has something to share. So Janet, do you mind talking about the items that you found for this one?
Yeah, actually, I did research on number 2.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. You're absolutely right.
I could make stuff up, but.
Well, let me jump to Stacy then. I think Stacy actually did research on number 1.
I did. What I did was I looked at, there were 6 jurisdictions, either long-range planning, like educational planning facilities, or facilities planning documents that we looked at the scoping committee for a year and a half ago. And so I just looked through those for examples of where they used a sector plan or included a school within a sector plan. And the best example that I found was actually the one that Robert mentioned as an example at our last meeting, which was in the Alexandria Long Range Educational Facilities Plan. I can post that link in a second when I'm not talking, but it within it was a plan that was put together in, I think, 2014, 2016, and then updated in 28. They had an amendment in 2018, but it was done. But what they did was, so in the executive summary, they listed that consider schools in future small area planning efforts. And so I just, what they called small area planning efforts, I just substituted, sector plans. I just use those as interchangeable referrals. But so consider schools in future small area planning efforts as outlined in Chapter 1, and then consider schools in the development review process as also outlined in Chapter 1. And so within those chapters, they say that it calls for, there was one. They gave an example where they looked at a small area plan in a section of Alexandria called the Beauregard Small Area Plan. And it says, so they included an analysis of existing schools in that area and projections of future students and development. And they said that the redevelopment of that area was expected to reduce the number of public schools. And so instead of proposing a new school in the area, they recommended more open space improvements to the adjoining schools, and that they, kind of as a long-term planning effort, leave space that might potentially accommodate later school use, but for the most part. So it was interesting the way that they, so in some cases it led to recommending including a new school, but in other cases it didn't, but it led to recommending more open space improvements. They also went into the development review process, which would, it's, it gets a little bit more complicated, but it says that when in cases where major development projects are proposed, and it would need to include a review of educational needs, and I mean, it goes into great detail. I don't need to read it all to you, but I mean, I think it's and it talks about maybe new zoning issues that might need to be considered for schools. And then they broke down each of their school solutions into mini master plans.
So would you, do you have a link handy that you could actually put in the chat?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So everybody who's interested in this question, that seems like a good plan to take a look at. I was attempting to find an email from Robert that I just saw today. I looked for it and I've lost it. I will send it out to everybody, and we'll make it publicly available as part of the notes. But it actually has all of the jurisdictions, or all of the cities that are cities and or counties that we looked at as part of the scoping exercise that we did in 2018.
This is Robert. I'll put the link on the chat so everyone has access to it.
Thank you, Robert. Because you can see, I think there were 6 different jurisdictions that we looked at as part of the scoping, and they were, I think, chosen because they had some similarities with Arlington as well. Terrific. I wanted to also, Matt, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as some background to that, and Stacy had mentioned this, those were public facility plan examples that the scoping committee was looking at in 2019 when we were trying to develop a scope for Arlington's public facility plan, and they were actually chosen because they had a wide range how different places addressed it. So it was at the time we were really looking for what's the range of what other places have done, and then to try to narrow that down as to what's right for Arlington.
Thank you for reminding us of that. 2019 seems like so long ago.
It really does.
Michael and Robert, can you, I mean, I just kind of did a quick review of the of those 6 plans. And, you know, really the Alexandria one stood out to me, and the other ones were kind of more broad and didn't really address this question directly. I mean, maybe, but if I missed one of them, I mean, maybe if one of the others, you know, plans that we looked at actually did address it and I missed it, am I missing something?
Stacy,
Well,
this is Robert. Oh, sorry, Matt. What I would say is that as part of the research, I mean, there might be other jurisdictions that have done innovative plans like that. One of the reasons I brought that one was I was familiar with it from, you know, having seen a presentation by the planning director in the city of Alexandria, who talked about schools and the interaction between the city of Alexandria's planning department and their school, in departments. But I am sure that there's other examples, and that's one of the things that will be worthwhile about, you know, the research by JFAC members.
I was going to say also, we do have some recent examples. Recent is in the last, you know, 2 years, 2 to 3 years, of some cities across the country changing some of their zoning and changing some of their single family zoning. So, you know, specifically, is it Minneapolis, Seattle? I think I'm missing one. So there have been some examples recently. So we could look to those cities because they have, in taking those actions to change zoning, they have potentially, I don't know that they have, but we'll do the research. They have potentially created a need for additional school facilities. Okay, any other thoughts, or anybody else do a little research on this or have other ideas of cities or jurisdictions you think we should be looking at? Of course, we don't have to have all the answers tonight. Steve.
So I did a very quick peek, and I discovered an interesting resource out at Berkeley called the Cities and Schools Center. And in particular, it goes back a ways, but they have a magazine, and in a 2008 issue, an article that I thought had some really good kind of 40,000 foot level discussion about integrating planning that, you know, more or less fits with this question. And so, you know, obviously it's California centric. There are a number of things that aren't relevant for us, like, you know, they have a lot of school districts that actually do have land, but they made some really good points, and they take kind of an infrastructure view, thinking about schools as part of public infrastructure, along with the rest of the tapestry of transportation, open space, stormwater, you know, other issues. So I feel like it's worth kind of a look for the nuggets of the very high level thinking that might be helpful for us. And I will throw in the chat both the link to the Cities and Schools Center and the link to that specific article, because I really liked some of the philosophy that was stated in the article. And this idea of trying to take a more, you know, all the buzzwords, holistic, integrated view of really infrastructure planning that thinks about our facilities, both schools and county, as part of an overall public infrastructure that we're seeking to develop. I just think it may be useful. So when I quit talking, I'll throw those into the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Another resource, I think, there are some other resources that we could look to, some, typical planning resources, right? The Urban Institute jumps to mind. I haven't necessarily searched that particular site, but I found all sorts of interesting things on there in past searches. So they may actually address this question directly as well. And I think we're going to find some other groups just like that that look at housing and the need for facilities, specifically schools. Okay. Any other thoughts on this particular question? So just to let you know, so I've taken notes on the items we have. We have some links in the chat that are either there or they're about to be there. And between now and the next meeting, what Stacy and I will do is we'll get together, compare notes. She will go ahead and put together a framework with a bunch of links for you. We'll do some additional research, and then she'll put together, an email to you. At least 2 weeks, I think, Stacy, we'll probably try to do 2 weeks before our next meeting so that you all can read. And I think read at least the links that we have here and maybe more that we find. And, I encourage you to do your own research as well. And send us anything that looks interesting. So again, for the first question, feel free to send it to Stacy. But anything that looks interesting to you, anything that looks like it could inform us on the question. And then we'll go ahead and collect all that information, give it to all of you to read before the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, we'll talk about, what we've learned or maybe what additional research we might need to do. And that really goes for both of those committees. Okay. So if we've exhausted this one, I'd like to go to question number 2, which is what do other Virginia jurisdictions incorporate? How do other Virginia jurisdictions incorporate schools in public-private partnership agreements? Now, I will note that I think we all may have gotten an email from Claire earlier today talking about a P3 agreements in Virginia. There actually is some policy around formal public-private partnerships in Virginia. It's a very structured document. I haven't had a chance to look in great detail. I believe that the last meeting we had in January, John Chadwick also mentioned this as well. And so if you all haven't seen that email yet, it'll come around from me to you so that you can take a look at that. Again, it is highly structured. I think it is for our purposes. It's good to know about. It's good to understand. It's the policy in Virginia. I did not believe in looking at it that it was mandatory, but we'll go through and read it. And I know several of you are lawyers in here, so you can help interpret the P3 document. I wanted to jump back to Janet because I know she did do some research on this second question. Janet, would you like to share?
Sure thing. And I hope I did this right for my first homework assignment. But again, back to Alexandria. So I found it was an Alexandria Joint City Schools Facility Investment Task Force. It was in 2018. And basically they cited in kind of the preamble, local public funds are stretched, sounds familiar. Federal infrastructure resources continue to decline, so competition for private investment and partnerships will grow, and that's what they're kind of recommending, to the locals to pursue. So their recommendation specifically was that leadership proactively challenge traditional practices and methods for capital project and service delivery by exploring new best practices to keep Alexandria competitive and attractive. And this includes public-private partnerships, joint use, co-location, shared municipal services. So I did find also, and I think this was subsequent to the release of that report, that, and I don't even know if Arlington has something like this, but the Alexandria City Manager's Office is actually looking to hire a full-time staff member to enhance and grow the city's use of public-private partnerships, or PPPs. So again, I don't know if Arlington has that already, but I liked in the article, one thing that they kind of note at the end is if you get private sector involvement, it says firms engaged in PPPs will generally have less incentive to cut corners on construction costs, since the PPEs give the firms more skin in the game, which I thought was kind of interesting. So they had a whole report. I'm not going to go through. It was a whole host of different recommendations about moving forward that, again, not really cognizant of what Arlington has done already. I didn't know what we could lift from that, but willing to delve more deeply into that. And then the other thing, I know I kind of rebelled, but Prince George's County, this was an article in August of 2020, WTOP, and I'll put all these links in the chat. But it was interesting because they're the first school system in the nation to use a public-private partnership to fund the building, excuse me, of several new schools. And kind of the incentive was that the winning bidder would build 6 new middle schools in the county by 2024, and then they would be receiving payments of, this one is $30 million a year for, it was many years. I can't find it right now. But anyway, so, they would build it and then they're going to be getting paid for a certain amount of years. I just thought it was an interesting concept of how they're going about that. So I'll put that link also in the chat room. And again, I don't know, this was August 2020. I didn't find anything more recent, so it's probably worth, maybe a phone call to the folks who were running this to see where that stands, because I couldn't find any more recent information on that.
So I have actually put your links in the chat since you so kindly had sent them to me ahead of time. I will put Claire's in there in a little bit. I will tell you that I just read, there was a story in the Washington Post. I kind of think it was yesterday. I believe the Prince George's County Board rejected this plan.
Really?
I believe so. We will have to research that, but I think it was Prince George's I was reading has rejected the plan. So they are. I don't think they're moving forward with that. Well, I'll have to find the link to that article and put it in here as well.
Well, we can steal their idea, can't we?
Right. Exactly. Just because they reject. Yeah, I think there was a lot of surprise that was the case. I see Claire has joined us. Hello, Claire. We actually have, we are on the second question. We're just kind of talking about what people have found out. And so the second question is about Virginia jurisdictions incorporating schools in public-private partnership agreements. Maybe I'll just say P3 because it's faster and easier. And Claire, I know you had actually sent something around today. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat, but I wonder if you, not to put you on the spot just as you enter, but I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about what you sent. And like I said, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. I only sent it to you and Matt and Robert. So sorry, not, if you didn't see it before, that's because I didn't send it to everyone. Just in doing a quick search on the issue, I ran immediately into a lot of well-established protocols. And partly, Kathleen, what I was a little bit curious about is whether you guys already knew about all the well-established protocols when you asked us to research the question, or if that was not already apparent, because it seems like there have been many public works, I guess is the best way to put it. So this is not just an education only public-private partnership development protocol, but they a lot of people have developed cell phone towers or community centers, basically anything other than highways, under what was originally described as an education set of protocols. So, look, I'm happy to talk more about it, but I just wanted to check in with you and Matt and Robert on whether this was news or whether this was old news.
I think that. Go ahead, Robert.
So this is Robert Claire. So the reason why we proposed this was, at a school board meeting last year, that was a topic that one school board member brought up, and it was very intriguing, very interesting, especially considering what a speaker earlier said, challenged budgets, etc., way of building something in partnership with private business. I do understand, for example, that that the PPPA, known as the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act of 2002 in Virginia, it is part of the Virginia Code. The thing is that the reason we asked that was because in Arlington County, there hasn't been a public-private partnership that involves schools under the PPEA. So the reason we were asking that is, what examples are there in Virginia that have used the PPEA to benefit or assist schools with infrastructure, with school facilities? Again, the reason we asked that is because we haven't done that in Arlington. So,
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Like, how have other jurisdictions complied with the PPEA vis-a-vis schools? That would be one question. Another question could be, how the jurisdictions determine when the monetary benefit of cost savings of the PPEA process outweigh the cost of the process? Because if you look at the code, it asks for, there are requirements of the jurisdiction of jurisdictions in governance, as well as the private partner. So where's that cost benefit analysis, and when did jurisdictions or school systems decide to pursue a public-private partnership?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So it's more like what's been done elsewhere, and how would we know if it would be beneficial to Arlington?
So it's almost a tipping point discussion. Now, Robert, maybe or Matt, you may already know this. I don't know off the top of my head. Does Arlington have the kind of locally adopted public-private partnership guidelines in our, like, that's locally adopted? Because that would be a first step to doing anything.
That's a good question. So Ted Black asked that at the last meeting, and I did consult John Chadwick on that. But the thing to note, though, is that he's not a lawyer, and neither am I. But in his opinion, and again, not legally informed, not being a lawyer, the PPEA is what, in his opinion, what would sort of supersede anything local related to public-private partnerships.
Okay. I am a lawyer, although I'm not licensed in Virginia, but I believe that the Virginia code sets out the broader parameters, but some of the examples, and I only sent 2 of them to you guys, and Kathleen put them in the meeting chat, but there are multiple examples of different cities, at least cities, maybe not counties, I don't know, adopting a local version that probably refines the requirements a bit and possibly actually implement some of the state level. I'm just guessing here because, you know, the Manassas one, the Virginia Beach one, I don't think that they adopted those PPEA related guidelines only to be superseded by the state. I think it was actually that they needed to adopt those in order to implement what the state had set out as a umbrella concept, I'm thinking. So, you know, definitely we can look into this a little bit more, but given, I think it's interesting that, you know, what makes Arlington distinct that we have not already had developers approach us or these types of partnerships explored until now, because we do have different demand levels for land usage up here, and that may dictate a lot of what's possible and feasible more than simply tipping points or cost benefit. I mean, maybe the cost benefit the discussion hasn't come up yet because the costs and benefits just haven't really even gotten close up around here.
So I think there were a lot of questions in that, and I think they're really good questions. I did want to mention that I also have put the response from Robert to Ted's question in the chat. It's, again, you don't need to copy all the links down because I will be sending out something. We will post it on our website as well, our webpage, to, you know, as part of a framework for the discussion. But you know, there are some really good questions in this. You know, one of the things I would say is something Arlington always has to look at is that we're Virginia is a deal and rule state, and oftentimes you actually have to be provided with permission in the legislation to actually exercise certain abilities that other places in Virginia can just do because they are different types of government. We're a county manager type of government. Others are cities. Others, you know, there are a variety of them that are in the code. And so sometimes, you know, and it's possible that has some bearing on this. It's possible it doesn't. But I do think we will want to consult some land use attorneys who, you know, will possibly be willing to talk to us. We probably will want to contact some developers, see if they're interested in talking to us, just about the general questions we have, not to enter into an agreement, but to maybe give us some insight into some of these questions. I think I saw a hand just a minute ago. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Stacy.
I just, you know, in having this conversation, it brought me back to a FAC meeting several years ago when we had a committee member that was a like his real job was as an economist, like a public policy economist. And the idea of, you know, these public-private partnerships came up in Arlington, and he said, well, why would we do that? We can borrow money at because Arlington is a AAA jurisdiction, we can borrow money at the lowest rate. So we're actually getting, you know, the best deal possible by bonding. I mean, I'm remembering this meeting. But I do think this is a really valuable question because as Claire noted, like this is kind of a tipping point question. I mean, I think I think it's relevant to bring this up because I think that it is, you know, we are in a jurisdiction that we go to great lengths to make sure that we are borrowing within our bonding limit so that we can maintain this AAA bond rating so that we can borrow money for the lowest rate. So I think that it is, you know, I would just suggest that in addition to having people that are land use legal experts, but to also potentially bring in someone that understands like public sector economies.
That's a good point. Okay. I thought I saw Matt's hand a minute ago. Matt, did you have something?
I did. Actually, I got knocked off the meeting for, I think, a couple of minutes. And I think Claire was maybe asking a question of staff right before I got knocked off. So I wanted to just make sure that I wasn't missing anything there. And also, I'm hoping that didn't affect our recording, but we might have missed some of that conversation.
It appears that it's still recording,
okay.
And we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes, which is about right.
Good. But was there a question for me?
I think Claire's question was really, what is it about Arlington? Other places in Virginia have done this and entered into these public-private partnership agreements. What is it about Arlington that this hasn't come up before now?
And I won't speak to APS, and I know the question is specifically about schools. The county has done a number of public-private partnerships. We just haven't used the PPEA tool. We've used other tools. So Fire Station 10 in Roslyn is a public-private partnership with the developer Penzance, and the Ballston Quarter redevelopment. We used a tool called a Community Development Authority. For that to work with another developer to get some public improvements for the Ballston Quarter redevelopment. Arlington Mill, of course, is a partnership where the county built a community center and worked with an affordable housing provider to achieve some affordable housing. So we do this and we look for opportunities when it benefits the county, and maybe for some of the reasons that Stacy was mentioning about our high bond rating, that it might not be a tool that's attractive to us because we have other tools.
And so I think, kind of following up on your point, Stacy's point, the points that have been made before, and also Susan's earlier point about, really getting, expanding the question a little bit. As Robert indicated, this was raised by a school board member, and it sounds like they were really asking, what is our whole, range of options? So it does sound like we could probably do, a lot of research around this particular question, and then maybe talk about alternatives that may make more sense, or that are other tools in order to achieve what we are ultimately looking for, which is a way to build schools maybe more economically and maybe more quickly than we do now. Claire?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to follow up. Matt, the question was, does the Arlington County have the locally adopted guidelines, ordinances that implement the PPEA? And it sounds like, based on the examples you gave, we do, because that's how the Arlington Mill and the other examples got built. And I just want to confirm that.
No, I want to clarify that we did not use the PPEA for any of those examples that I had mentioned. We used other tools.
So we may not have a local ordinance that, like Manassas does, like Virginia Beach does, yet adopted for the PPEA provisions.
Right. To my knowledge, I don't think we do, although I know that law has been around since 2002. So we might have done something early on where we were exploring that, but certainly not recently.
Okay, I mean, it's certainly something one can Google, but it doesn't sound like, let me just put it this way. I suspect we would need to adopt something in order to take advantage of the statewide or code and how it lays out things. And the fact that it's been a long time, everything I read about the PPEA is that it's great because developers come to the government, and you don't have to figure out what you want, the developers will identify it for you and come to you. And if we haven't been approached until now, I think that says something.
If I can just jump in real quick, this is Rodney. Back to what Matt was saying, the options that we have besides the PPEA would be wonderful to know, because I mean, they're, aside from having to wait for the developer to come to us to sort of stimulate something, it would be nice to know what kind of tools we have in our quiver to work with. So if Matt can provide that information to us either by link or somehow what those other tools are, that'd be great.
Actually, I think we could probably just find them ourselves, and I'm happy to do that for the 3 examples Matt provided, because it would be outlined in probably the board report, how that happened, and I remember some of them. So yeah, but that's a good point, Rodney. And I think, again, I think one of the outcomes of the paper that I see us writing on this question would probably include the tools that you've mentioned, Rodney, or the tools that have been mentioned, and maybe others that we haven't yet used. As we do a broader search of what is allowed in other places or done in other places, we could probably, talk about why they may or may not be suitable for Arlington. I think somebody else also had their hand up. I see Claire, but I'm gonna, oh yeah, it was Ted. Ted?
Oh, yeah, thank you. One thing I was gonna say, partnerships is one of the elements in the APS strategic plan. And now when it was put in, it was primarily looking at like experiential types of things for students and internships and things like that. But it was open-ended to develop the use of resources in the community, including businesses. And so it provides that opening to start doing exactly what you're talking about, to explore for how APS can enter into those partnerships that it hasn't done in the past. So that fits into kind of the direction that was put in there as part of the strategic plan that they're operating under right now, just as a little background there for folks, and how this is building out that, or will can explore and provide the options potentially for the APS to go into that area of the plan. So
thank you, Ted. Claire?
Thanks, and I'll try not to dominate. Sorry. I wanted to try to read between the lines here a little bit. If we are facing possible school capacity issues in some of our more commercial developed corridors, are we really trying to dig into this question now because we anticipate maybe a non-traditional school needing to be built, i.e., hey, the school's on the 3rd and 4th and 5th floors of a larger development, and a private developer owns the land or something like that. Is that kind of where we're heading, or where we're picking around the edges on?
Claire, this is Robert. There was, in suggesting that question, there wasn't a set goal or a set vision for what the future could look like in terms of future school facilities. It was more of like proposing this as a a research question, like what's possible in terms of public-private partnerships. What do they look like? Again, it was to for JFAC to be able to provide information on what those public-private partnerships, what types could there be, because maybe it wouldn't necessarily be related to a school facility. It could be related to something, with some of our support facilities, for example, transportation, fleet management, etc. So it was more to kind of gather ideas and thoughts on public-private partnerships as they relate specifically to schools-related facilities. But there wasn't any like thinking ahead to schools-related facilities and with classrooms, etc.
I would say though, I think that's a good reminder, Claire, that in anything that in any document that we create, we should provide context, and that context certainly pre-COVID was that a lot of our schools were definitely over capacity. We are anticipating in all the projections that they will be seriously over capacity. Some more than others, but and we are facing a situation now where we have less money to spend. We've had a period of depressed revenues because of COVID. We'll be coming out of that, probably not, hopefully it'll be quickly, but I don't know what quickly means actually, or how to measure that, but it'll be some time before we recover economically. And, the context also includes the fact that we spent considerable time, some people in this room, this virtual room, looking at how to add 800 seats to the Career Center. And the dollar figure that came back was made it unbuildable. And so, this is the context, I think, in which we have to place this question and our suggestions to it. Ted, did you have another comment? Because I see your hand up. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, no, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Okay. So I think this has been a terrific discussion. Obviously, just the beginning of the discussion we're going to have. And it's getting close to 8:20. That's about where I wanted to go in terms of the amount of time spent on this. I don't want to cut anybody off, though. If members of the commission have comments or thoughts on this, I'd like to allow some space for that. There are a few more minutes left. And while you're thinking about that, I just want to reiterate then that Stacy and I will take all of this information in, all of these links. I encourage you to send questions and or any research that you think is pertinent, links to that to us in about 2 weeks, 2 weeks prior to our next meeting. We will send everybody out the framework for questions 1 and 2. We did see that people, had basically divided themselves already in terms of their interest, which is great. And so you can look for that. Again, I should mention that whatever we put together will also be available on the website. We will make sure that that gets up there, or we will actually ask Matt, Led, and Robert to make sure it gets up there. So thank you in advance. I did have one more comment on this, and that is in about, I can't remember, maybe it was 2013, 2014, there was a group called the Superintendent's Master Planning Group. It was led by actually, oh my gosh, he's a former member of this commission. He was the chair of it, and I'm totally blanking on his name, and I can't believe it. But that group issued a report on a variety of questions, and I am kind of thinking that one of the questions was, kind of creative ways to get schools built. And so I'm going to find the link to that, dust it off, and also include it in our information if it turns out that it does, a portion of that report does address this question. Because I'm thinking there was some interesting thinking around this, and the report may have reflected that. So I'll include that. And if you remember, I'll have to come up with his name in a minute. Okay, so if there are no other thoughts, I don't see any more questions on this. Thank you for a really good discussion. I think this is a good start. Stacy, how are you feeling about being able to, provide a framework and get that back?
I feel okay about it with your support.
Yeah, I think we have a lot here to work with. So
I do too. And wasn't the guy who led the master planning committee, Todd McCracken?
Thank you. Yes, Todd McCracken. Thank you. I could not remember. And probably members of you, some of you were also on that. I know Greg Greeley served on it as well. Lots of people. Actually, there were several. It was a large group. Thank you. Yes, I can't believe I forgot Todd McCracken's name. That's embarrassing. Okay. All right. So what I'd like to do now is actually turn to the liaison updates. The first one is on our agenda is the Clarendon Sector Plan. Susan Cunningham is representing us. Before Susan gives us a report, I would like to just reach out one more time to all of you and say Susan would love to have a second on this. It's a great way to break in and kind of understand the sector plans. So I think there might be some additional feedback. In fact, I think the feedback, the deadline for feedback was actually extended a little bit. So Susan, I wanted to pass it to you if there's any update on this.
Yeah, I don't really have much update. The first meeting I'll be attending is March 3rd. So it's a perfect time if someone wants to jump in. I took it because Kathleen was a little too close to it and wanted to have someone else grab it. So happy to grab it, but also happy to have a second or even a second and a third, and then I can become irrelevant is also okay. But I don't know too much yet. Just everything's up on the website about what's being planned, and the first conversation is scheduled for the 3rd.
Thank you. I thought it was earlier this week, so I had the wrong date. Thanks. And if you, again, just Google Arlington, Virginia, Clarendon Sector Plan, it is an update to the existing plan. There has certainly been a lot of, since I live in one of the adjoining areas, there has been a lot of chatter on the listserv about this. But so if you are interested, again, I think it's a great way to kind of understand the sector planning process, especially if you are looking at contributing to question number 1. This might be a really good experience for you as well. So please reach out to me if you're interested, or just reach out straight to Susan as well. All right, school site studies. This is something that we had presented to us before. Stacy Snyder is our representative on that. I didn't know if there was any update on this, Stacy.
No real update. The report itself is supposed to be out in March. Was the last update I heard. There was a question that came up from Susan at the last meeting about whether or not there were storm water, whether there's a study on the sites that show whether or not the stormwater management is consistent with the county's goals. And so I asked Michael Frickel if anything about the stormwater would be included in the sites. And he said, historically the studies have not been consistent. And so let me pull up for the email. He said, historically, there's been no template for studies, so there's some variability. There are some references to stormwater issues in some studies, but it's not consistent. But when he pulls everything together, it will be included about, what they have in terms of stormwater issues. So, but other than that, that's, the study is still being organized and pulled together.
Okay, thank you. And then I think Nia is with us. I think I saw her enter. Yes, she is. So I just also wanted to give Nia Bagley, who is our liaison from the Planning Commission, an opportunity to just say hi and also see if there's anything that is on the radar of the Planning Commission that she thinks the JFAC should be aware of. Nia?
Yeah, first I apologize for coming in a little bit late. I was detained at my office. Second, I do want to compliment everybody. What a tremendous discussion tonight. Very interesting, and things that have been discussed at various levels and various other places within the county as well. So I really applaud the progress that JFAC is making, and I'm happy to be a part of it as a liaison. Kathleen, I'm not sure if you saw, it may be of interest to folks. Matt Pfeiffer sends out every so often an update on upcoming site plan filings and things. And if you didn't get it, I'm happy to email it to you and see if there's anything that you want to share from that. It's just his way of sort of updating us on what filings are coming up, so that we just kind of have an idea of what's coming down the road. The Planning Commission did meet in February. We meet monthly, usually 2 nights, sometimes 3 nights, depending on our agenda. Really, I don't think in February, unless you're in a residential parking permit program area, that you really had much going in the Planning Commission meetings in February. I don't have the March agenda yet, but we meet on March 8th and March 10th. I do want to circle back around, though, to the Clarendon sector plan, because as Kathleen knows, many times when we're sitting with private developers, and even before COVID, there were always retail spaces set aside in buildings, which many of us know as we go around the county now, they're not filled. Questions have come from planning commissioners, me and many before me, about what other uses can we have. Inevitably, schools always come up when we have a site plan that comes in front of us, more so, how is this going to affect the schools, but not could we maybe use some of the space for the schools. So although it is just an update of a sector plan, there's a lot in the Clarendon sector plan. This is the LRPC, Long Range Planning Commission, which is a division of the Planning Commission, which is next Wednesday, the 3rd at 7 p.m. And it is open to the public, and you can do public comment at the end. You can certainly say, you're a member of JFAC or whatever. But because there is a lot being planned there, or at least being proposed to happen there, and lots of building space. And, it seems like perhaps some of the questions that were being mulled over tonight and the thoughts should be coming up, like when we're talking about this in the LRPC setting versus when we actually get the individual site plans down the road, where, we're going to put retail here and there and the other thing. And then it's like, okay, who's going to fill that? So just again, a plug to, help Susan out and actually just listen to it yourself, because we don't have a lot of sector plans in the county, but it is one of the planning tools. And this is a major piece of sort of Clarendon West that is being proposed or certainly looked at this time. So if anyone has any questions for me or things that they would like me to be on the look for them for to report back to you, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you also for reminding us that really the place for us to be plugged in is before site plan, right? It's the long range planning, which is very much aligned with what we do. And because we, think broadly about these things, not that the folks on the LRPC don't, because I know they do, but sometimes we might come with a very specific question or thought about the long range planning that's being done. So I do encourage all of us to make a point at one point or another during this year to attend an LRPC meeting and follow what's going on. So the Clarendon sector plan is one of them that it is happening now that you can certainly do. There are other sort of long range planning things happening as well, like the Pentagon City phase development site plan process, and also planning for Crystal City, all of that. I think that LRPC, though, is done, and we're moving into site plan. Is that right? I think that's right, isn't it, Nia?
Tonight, I know that part of the Crystal City situation, they were talking tonight about heights And I think that was a LRPC meeting, so Long Range Planning Commission meeting tonight about that. The other, I believe, Monday there might have been, I was in another meeting Monday, but there might have been the one about Pentagon City, there was, but the status of that, I haven't looked at any of that since, so I will be better informed the next time.
And I was following that for a little while, and then I haven't for the last month and a half. So
Exactly.
I need to get back on that as well.
I know how that goes.
So thank you very much, Nia. We're always very happy to have you here. And the fact that you are such a long-term liaison with us has been, I think, really helpful to us. Thank you. Because you were right there in the conversations about the Buck property and the hospital site. Again, thank you to Stacy, who is continuing to plug us into school site studies and ask questions, and certainly to Susan, who is our volunteer on the Clarendon Sector Plan. But I will once again put a plug in for somebody to team up with her on that as well. I think I see Steve's hand. Steve, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I actually had a quick question for Nia, and the question is, Nia, are you hearing the county's commitment to biophilic cities? Is that beginning to inform the discussions that you're seeing in the LRPC and the Planning Commission? And if so, do you see it bearing fruit at all, or is it just kind of a, oh yeah, biophilic, whatever the heck that is? Or
it's interesting. I ended up by default chairing the Marriott SPRC Site Plan Review Committee. And if you want a good case study in how, as staff and I were meeting with the developer and saying, hey, the biophilic means a lot to us in Arlington, and it really does. So that's it, Steve. Thank you for that. And see the response. You can go back to the SPRC thing and see their presentation. It is the one that I use now if developer approaches us, which they do in advance sometimes on the Planning Commission. They sort of just want to run things by you and see what you might tell them, input you might give them, that type of thing. And I always point developers now to the Marriott one because they were it was incredible, really, their presentation with that came in. So yeah, biophilic, thank you for bringing that up. It means a lot to us, some of us very personally. For me, I'm a big, green kind of person. So I'm really big on bird-friendly glass. That's one of they know that I can, typically I'm going to be the one that asks that. So yeah, it is something that we are really, we hold developers to a number of things, as I mentioned in the previous meeting. The checklist, we hope that they can meet all of them. Do they ever meet all of them? 100% no. But we keep pushing for that, and I think our standards are pretty high. So yeah, biophilia has been, from the board all the way down, it's been something that, everybody they understand. And if if I'm a chair of a SPRC, as I was more recently, and this particular one's been paused, but when I met with them the first time just to see their initial presentation, before we did all the meetings, which is typical, we do that. And there wasn't anything in there about biophilia. I'm like, you better put that in there because there's going to be a lot of people besides me asking about that. And sure enough, there was. And I pointed them back to the Marriott one to see how they approached it. So yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if you saw the rendering of what Amazon,
the Amazon headquarters.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like Xanadu meets, it reminds me in a way of kind of like a very modernistic Tower of Babylon with the greens all over it. But yeah, so no, it's a great question. And, it's very, as we build things that actually create warmth in a place where we're trying not to warm things up so much, then we have to be thinking about all the stuff that we can do to counteract that and then keep it still, instead of concrete city, something, livable and wonderful for those of us who have to live with it. So yeah, so it's a big thing. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks. That's very encouraging to hear. And just one momentary editorial comment that I think the concepts are really important for education as well, for benefits to the students and the staff. So hopefully we're starting to see that kind of translate over to the APS side and their thought processes as well. But thanks, that's very encouraging, Nia. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, and thank you, Nia, for the answer, and thank you for the question, Steve. Earlier, I think, I don't know if it was Eric or Rodney who asked the question. I think it was Eric who asked the question about sort of where we're going this year. I do want to report that Stacy and I did have an initial meeting with Christian Dorsey to talk to him about, he is our liaison from the county board, to talk about these questions, how we were thinking of approaching them, and sort of what we'd like to see for the rest of the year. One of the things I do want to mention that is also very high on our list, and we have a list actually, but really high on the list is also taking a look at the siting process that was recommended as part of the community facility study. It was used a little bit, it was applied, I think, when this commission was talking about the Quincy site and the, I think it was the Quincy site specifically, but, and the swap with the hospital. But I think there were some things that this commission learned as a result, some things that maybe needed to be tightened up in that process or even changed to make it more effective, because I don't really think we have exercised the process that was put forward in the community facility study for on any site, school or otherwise, any public facility site. So so looking at that and you know, taking a look at that and how it could be applied to a given use case is something we want to do this year as well, in the first half of the year. So that is something we've mentioned. Again, that also sets us up nicely because for the schools and public facilities master planning, because this the siting process would obviously be part of any sort of master planning process that we would propose. Okay, so thank you. That's it for the liaison updates. I also hope that addresses a little bit of the question of what it is we're hoping to do this year. So it's the 3 questions. It's the siting process. We know that we're going to have at least a joint session with the FAC probably in May to look at and to make some recommendations to both the county and the school boards on the CIP. That's sort of a standing annual thing we do. If people have ideas about meeting with other commissions on, you know, if you think to answer these questions, for instance, we might want to talk to another commission that would have a particular expertise, let me know. Or if there are other reasons we might want to meet with another commission to discuss public facilities and planning for them in general. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is turn to public comment. We do have a few people with us. Let's see, we have Cynthia still with us. And we have Lita and Estidu, and I think that might be it. Am I missing anybody? June and Michelle are here, their staff. Yeah, I think that's it. So Cynthia, do you have some words of wisdom for us?
Oh, don't I
to set you up there?
Anyway, hello everyone, and just again, I am reporting for my civic association, and but personally, I just think these questions are fascinating, and I was so interested to see, you know, where you would go with them, and it's been a great conversation, and I thought I was taking good notes, but I have to confess, Kathleen, I don't know where, I can't say exactly where you came down with on the 2 separate meetings or the meetings and the breakouts, but I just wanted to say that initially, I would hope you would do the one meeting and the breakout rooms, so you could come together and there could be like a summary statement of whatever got resolved or done in each of the things. But I realize how difficult that may be, because maybe the agenda of one group finishes before the other. On the other hand, if you have the two separate meetings, I'm wondering, will you still provide for a public comment in those committees, or how will you, or maybe you all want to talk about it with Stacey and figure all these things out? But that's kind of sort of where I'm, questions I would like some, direction or response to.
Since we have time, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and answer what I think we might want to do, or what I think I heard. I'm going to take the last question first. So as you also heard, we are interested in expanding those committees so that they don't just have JFAC members or JFAC commissioners, that they also include members of the public who are interested in actively participating in this conversation. And it looked like everybody was in agreement with that. Everybody seemed to think it was a good idea. So yes, they are public meetings. We would still have public comment, but I guess I would encourage you that if you want to be part of the conversation, send me an email and tell me that you'd like to join one or the other of the committees, so that way you could actually be, at the table, as it were.
And I do appreciate that. But I am asking, broadly for people who would just like to, be an observer and then figure out what they want to say. And then conversely, you can't be in both things at the same time. So what
Sure.
would be, if you did do the separate meetings, how would someone get informed about what's happening in the meeting that you're not in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would think, I heard pros and cons for the next meeting. What I think I might propose, and certainly Stacey and I will need to talk about this, but I'm kind of leaning toward having two meetings, one after the other. So it's the same meeting, really. I'm sorry, let me say it differently. The same link, the same meeting, but we just take the first question for the first 55 minutes and the next question for the last 55 minutes. And that way everybody knows what was said. But, again, I guess I want the right to reserve, to reserve the right to change that if it turns out Stacey and I find so much information on these questions, and the framework lends itself to doing a 2-hour meeting instead. So to the other question you asked, which is then how would one know what was said? They're going to be recorded. There will be minutes from them, but also, again, using the community facility study model that I thought worked really well. We would actually have a meeting, another public meeting when we're ready to kind of present, what our ideas are so far, to be able to get feedback from each other. We would actually do a presentation to each other, in a public meeting. These are the questions we, researched, and this is how we're, coming down on them. So that is what I would propose that we might want to do. So that way, even though you may have been in one meeting on the land use study and sector plans question, you still would get a pretty comprehensive overview of what the public-private partnership agreements talked about. And that, thinking through time, that would possibly be in the June meeting, our June meeting.
Okay, thank you very much for those additional thoughts.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for your feedback. I did want to ask Lita. Lita, do you have any thoughts or comments for us?
No, except to say thank you to you and to the rest of the commissioners for your willingness to entertain inviting members of the public to the working groups for these two questions. So I'm very pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being with us tonight, both of you. And again, if you are interested in being in one or the other committees, please let me know. And we're happy to put you in. All right. now I'd like to, so this is the end actually of our public comment and the end of our agenda. So are there any other, is there any other new business or any other comment that anybody wants to make that's sort of apart from our agenda, or even, you know, on the agenda if you forgot to say it before? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So amazing. We actually finished early. This might be a first for us. I don't ever remember us finishing early. But thank you all. I think this was a really productive meeting. I hope you have, you know, you were pleased and you're walking away with a good feeling about what we're going to do for the next couple months. Thank you so much for, you know, to those of you who actually did the research beforehand and had, you know, interesting ideas and questions that you posed during this meeting. Thank you all. Everybody was very engaged. So I greatly appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we come up with as a group on these questions. So you get some time back tonight. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. And I look forward to speaking with you all soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Take care, all. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And I wanted to